Okay, got it. Good. Nice. Okay, welcome to our ethics, second session of ethics from the Foundations curriculum. So last week, we dealt with what is called covenant ethics. With creation ethics. We're doing covenant ethics this week. So creation ethics basically says that it's what we owe the world, everybody. So we began with, in the beginning, God created humanity in God's image. So that meant everybody, right? And then we talked about what happens when someone murders someone. What do we do with that? How do we deal with that? And text says that we owe our life if we take a life. Mm-hmm. And then we focused on the issue of slavery, runaway slave. What we owe the runaway slave, we have to treat that person with respect and dignity. We have to house them. We have to feed them. We have to take care of their basic needs. We can't return them to their former owner. And then it talked about with the trial, the witnesses in a trial of murder are told that they have the responsibility of the bloods, in the plural, of the person who's on trial, because if any false testimony gets in from them, they are responsible for that person and for their progeny or any that would have come out of them. And they are answerable to God. But it also comes back and says you have a responsibility to tell the truth. So you can't say, I don't want to testify because the burden is too great. So it's talking about the notion, that's the ethics that we owe humanity. We owe ethics to humanity. Today, we're going to talk about what do we owe to our own group, to Jews, to the Jewish people. And next week, when we finish this section, we're going to talk about what happens when there's a conflict between what we owe humanity and what we owe our people. Because what we talked about last week is we said there is an aspirational ethic, or we might call it an ideal ethic, right? All human beings are equal, created in the image of God. That's ideal, it's aspirational. But then there's reality. What do you do when reality offers you not an opportunity to treat everybody equal? How do you do that? And now we're going to say, what happens when you owe your own people a certain ethic, but you also owe humanity an ethic? And so conflict will come up next week. Mm-hmm. So any comments or questions before we launch into our material this week? Okay. So I'm going to screen share here, hopefully. There we are. There we are. And the first one is an unusual one. It's one that doesn't come from our tradition, but comes from a philosopher, an ethicist, who wrote this piece called Revisiting in a Different Voice. And it's a concept of ethics that has been kind of promulgated. Carol Gilligan did this, but it's kind of a way that we can think about ethics in a specific way that helps us visualize it. So who would like to read this?
I'll read.
Oh,
go ahead, Robbie.
Here first, Amy.
Okay. Our lives are embedded in a network of relationships. As humans, we are interdependent. It's the understanding of the human condition that Martin Luther King articulates in his letter from the Birmingham jail. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. From this vantage point, the parameters of judgment and action shift. I have written at length about this paradigm shift, explaining that it does not mean choosing relationships over self or caring over justice. Instead, it signifies a change in the question. Rather than seeking to establish whose rights take precedence in a contest of rights, the question becomes how to act in a network of mutuality where what affects one directly affects all indirectly, like walking on a trampoline.
Okay, so let's spend a few minutes talking about what it means to walk on a trampoline. How many of you have actually walked on a trampoline?
I've tried.
I have.
So
To me,
what is
what
that like? Yes, Gail?
Well, I think when no matter what you're doing, as you're moving, you're jumping, you are affecting the other person
Right.
in whatever movement you're
step.
making. So if I go high, it could be more dangerous or less energy, less dangerous, but we're there together and we are being affected by each other.
Well, and how are you being affected?
Positively or negatively. They may be getting so excited to see me jump high that they may want to join me. Or they might say this is ridiculous, or they might fall off or get hurt. So it can be either way. Or I can be inspired by them. They don't want to do it. And I'm feeling, well, why am I doing all the work?
Anyone?
Listen to that.
We're not equal. We're not equal if somebody else is on the trampoline, because when we're down, they're up.
Well, that's
And
good.
when we're up, they're down. It doesn't stay even. It's not an even keel.
Good, good. What else?
Like that.
We may see the person we're affecting, and I guess we may not see the people that we're affecting, but I guess the point is obligated that we must think about our impact broadly.
Right, and I was reminded of for whom the bell tolls. Do not ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And it's essentially the same idea. And visually, what I was thinking about was not so much trampoline, though I agree with Gail and Bobby in how they characterize that, but rather every day when I look at Government Cut from my window, I see the boats that are creating the wakes. And those wakes affect the stability of all the other boats around them.
Right. Well, and you point out that when you're on the trampoline, it's not just up and down, but you're not equal weight usually. And so you affect differently. If you imagine a small child with an adult on a trampoline, the adult causes a much greater effect on the child than the child causes on the adult, right? And one of the things that happens is if I'm jumping on the trampoline, I can throw that other one off balance. So how does this play out as a way of understanding ethics?
Well, I think it's also a matter of value and trust, because if both of you are on the trampoline, you have to learn to trust each other and really protect each other in a way, because if you start jumping too high, you could throw somebody off and they can get hurt. So I think ethically you have to work as a team, possibly in a way.
Okay,
because
good.
I mean, everything you do affects the other person. So I think it creates planning and for the movement.
Good. Larry, you were going to say something?
Yeah, it brought to mind actually an op-ed piece that Tom Friedman wrote this week about rights and responsibilities. that everybody seems to think that they have the right to do whatever that they choose to do without accepting responsibility for the actions and results that occur.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, we are responsible. We have to be held accountable.
So there's a mutuality in all of this. It's not
Right.
just my actions, but it's your actions. Each one affects the other and others around. If you imagine a larger trampoline where it's not just 2, but there could be 5 on it, that becomes even more. Or imagine the boats that you talked about. If there are a number of boats and there are people on wave runners, in small boats, big boats, sailing boats, you see it affects everything differently. And each one has to be responsible for the other and for themselves in order to make it work, or else boats get capsized, people fall off the trampoline, right?
Mhm.
So now let's look at the second text, which takes us to a more specific aspect of how it affects our people. Let's get, here we are from the Talmud. Okay, who would like to do number 2?
Let me read.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. If you lend my people money, even the poor with you, my people or strangers, my people have precedence. A poor person or a rich one, the poor have precedence. Your poor relatives and the poor of your city, your poor relatives have precedence. The poor of your city and the poor of another city, the poor of your city have precedence.
All right, so here we have an ethical issue. There's a limited pot, right? You have a limited amount of money. You have a limited amount to give. Who gets precedent? They all need. They're all knocking on your door. What you do will affect them. Who gets precedence? Who gets first dibs at being loaned the money? And according to this, in the Talmud, it says, my people have precedence. My people. And then a poor person over a rich person. So we're talking about my people. But even in my people, the poor person of my people has precedence over a person that may have more money, because we're talking about lending money. Most banks would do the opposite, right?
Right.
Banks lend to wealthy people before they lend to poor people. It's a better business deal. This is an ethical question. And the ethics are, you should be lending to the poor person before you lend to the rich. And then there's the question of, if it's your relative and just a person you don't know who's in your city, who takes precedent? This says your relative takes precedent, right? And not the stranger who's poor. And then the poor person in your city takes precedent over a poor person in another city. So let's stop share for a minute. So how do you feel about that as an ethical approach?
This is charity begins at home.
Very much at home, right?
Right.
It's dealing not with charity though.
It's lending. Okay.
Right, because
It's similar. Yeah.
tzedakah would be a different kind of approach, because tzedakah, it's not the same kind of ethical issue. Tzedakah would be more the one who has the greatest need in any situation. So in tzedakah, you could argue that what if you live in a town where everyone is middle class or wealthy? I mean, like Gail was talking about getting an apartment. In order to live on Miami Beach these days, everybody's got to be at a certain level, right? To pay rent.
Yes.
Right? Unless you're in subsidized housing, and there is a little of that left, You know, you're pretty much at a certain level. But what if you're in Overtown or in another section of town? What if that person is asking for tzedakah and someone who you know is paying $2,000 a month rent is asking for tzedakah? Well, you might have a different approach in tzedakah. But in loaning, this one seems to say, my first job is to loan my people, a Jew, right? And among my people, a poor person over a person that has means. And among my people, my city, someone on my city before I loan to a Jew in another city. How do you feel about that?
Is there an expectation that you're going to be paid back if you're loaning them?
Yes, there is an expectation you'll be paid back, but like with any loan, you know, sometimes you get paid back, sometimes you don't.
It doesn't happen.
No, why?
I mean, it's happened to me. I've loaned money out and I knew to a relative and I knew in deep in my heart it would never come back. And I've never asked for it.
Well, and that is one of the things about loaning money to a relative, right? We might say don't loan money to a relative because you have no expectation you're going to get it back. But this is a statement of ethics from a Jewish standpoint.
Well,
So
I think if you're going to loan it, you have to be able to afford to give it.
yeah,
And I would think that you have to say, if I give it and they don't pay back, it's okay. Because if you really are in desperate need of your own money and you give it, there's a chance you may then have hardships. But yet, some of these tales that we read in the Bible and everything, you know, they are giving the last drop of whatever they have to someone poor coming along in the desert or whatever. And it's kind of an expectation as being Jewish that you're going to hopefully give when you see someone in need.
Larry, see your
You can.
I see this as a form of triage. You have to make priorities. You have to know what matters. And sometimes the judgments are difficult, but here the priority is that you take care of those in need. And if they are your relatives, they come first. And if they are in your community, they come second. This is how one makes judgments. I don't have a problem with this.
right. Well, this is, yes, Dennis, you're going to have to unmute, Dennis.
So I think that it's more complex than this single order of priority. And I think that getting paid back does enter into it because it is a loan and someone's asking for a loan. I think what the use of the money is for. I think what the value of the expenditure to be made is to, you know, is it to educate a child or is it to go into business? You know, I think these are complicated issues, more complicated than this answer suggests.
Right. Well, you're right. This is one text, but one of the things we should look at is if you're loaning a Jew money, according to the Torah, you don't charge interest, right? This is not a business deal. That, in other words, for our people, we're talking about what they used to say is unseren, you know, us. Among Jews, it says in the Torah, you don't lend on interest. So one could argue that this kind of lending in some way is kind of halfway between really lending and tzedakah. because
Yeah,
you're not getting anything in what? Right. Well, you don't get profit, first of all. There's no guarantee you're going to get it back. And you're not taking anything in security. You don't get it. You don't get something in security. You are loaning it to a Jew. Hopefully you'll get the money back. But like Rachel said, that's not the principle here.
but that does not simplify the analysis of what you do. It makes it more complex.
Well, because you're assuming that you get to evaluate who you give money to based on the need.
Yes,
And this one is saying the need is much simpler. It is the first one that's asked you who is a relative. Let's say 5 people come to ask you for money. First, you give to your relative regardless of what the project is. What if your relative is borrowing money for some foolish thing that you feel is absolutely ridiculous? It doesn't say you have a right to make that decision. Your relative has asked you for money, and
No,
you're gonna loan.
where does it say that I have to decide to lend the money? I mean,
Oh, well, no. The assumption is you've decided to lend money. You have money. We're not talking about that you're desperate. Like what Gail said, you're not desperate.
I'm not desperate.
No, you don't need this money to survive. And this is not about life and death. This is, you have some money that you have to lend. And a number of people have asked you for money. And this gives you an idea of how to prioritize.
Yes, it does. It gives me an idea.
But you don't love that idea.
I think it's a more complex analysis, and more things are involved in it, and I'm going to make certain value judgments about what the utilitarian value of the asker is. I'm not going to. Yes, I'm going to prioritize perhaps education over business dealings. Maybe I'm going to prioritize elderly. Now that I'm elderly, over something else. I mean, I think it's more complex than this issue, than this answer.
I got you, but what do you guys feel about the whole idea of giving first to Jews? Remember, we started last week with saying everyone is created in the image of God. And now this text is saying, yes, but first we look at our people, the particular first. That takes priority.
I think family is very important, and I see the Jews as a family, a big family. I think I put high priorities on the family.
All right, Fred, what do you think about this? You got something to say, Fred? Oh, can you hear us, Fred? I'm not sure he hears us. You're not hearing it. Alice, you want to step in? No? Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, Rabbi, I just
Amy.
wanted to say something and introduce a slightly different way of thinking about it. So I totally agree with Dennis. And also I think of, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And I think of myself in the broader sense, myself kind of encapsulating, the Jewish people. But the other dimension that had occurred to me is this doesn't give us any direction, assuming that there is that the people being addressed here have a finite pool of money that they don't need to live on. What it doesn't help us with is how do you make the decision between lending that money, whether it's to a Jew or a family member or whomever, and giving tzedakah, which is one sort of a higher ethical value than the other.
Well, they're all ethical issues. And if you ask, the tradition would argue that mitzvot are mitzvot. and that you don't weigh a mitzvah and say this one's more important than that one. Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg used to say, what's the most important mitzvah? And the answer is the one that's in front of you. That's the most important mitzvah. Whatever one is there, that's the most important mitzvah. You don't say, well, that's a good mitzvah, but I'm going to wait another day or two and see if there's a better mitzvah to do. Yeah, maybe a week from now I'll get a better mitzvah, so I'm gonna wait. I won't do this mitzvah. He said, no, if the mitzvah is there, it may seem like it's a trivial mitzvah to you. What if the mitzvah is something like shaking the lulav, an etrog? It's right there, and you're thinking, maybe I should do something more important, like go feed the hungry. Well, but the mitzvah is there. At that moment, you don't have to seek it, it's there. And if the mitzvah is to feed the hungry, you don't have to think, maybe there's a more important mitzvah I can find. Whatever it is, the one that's in front of you, he would argue, is the most important. Yes, Alice.
I don't know whether this is totally off the track, but you were just talking about giving money to Jews. After reading the book Caste and seeing how the Blacks have been treated in our country, I just got I must get 20 asks for money in the mail every week. And this one came from a group of these Black soldiers who were responsible for many operations during World War II and the Korean War. And they were great for our country, but when they came back, they couldn't be in certain hotels. They had to eat in certain restaurants, and I'm feeling that I should be giving to them, because I think the Jews, for the most part, we take care of ourselves. But these are people who really need it. And I'm more inclined to give to them this week.
This week. Well, it's right in front of you, Alice. It's the one you got asked for today, right? So think about this. It's one of there are Jews who have a lot of resources and who give to universities and museums and ballet and opera, and don't give to Federation or synagogues or Israel, right? Or ADL, right? They prioritize the general cultural community over our people and the needs even of the poor of our people, because Federation has a responsibility to deal with the poor of our people. It's through family, through the food bank, through various means that we support. So this one says, no, that doesn't mean you can't give culture, but first you give to our people, and then you give to our city, the people in our city, and then you can give beyond that. And then if you got, gazillions of money, give to the opera, give wherever you want to give, but don't neglect the people who are your relatives, who are your family, who are your city. That's the argument that this ethic is making, right? And of course, those people that have asked you from the Black soldiers, yeah, sure, because you do support, you are supporting the synagogue and tzedakah and our people and the city, right? So yes, it doesn't mean you can't give to others. It's about priority. Joni?
I was just saying, who are we to judge?
It's not a question of, you asked who are we to judge? We're not told to judge. This is a text that is to instruct us, right? The text is instructing us. They're not listening to this text, or they're saying, I have a different priority. I have a different way of thinking about it. This is a traditional Jewish way of thinking about it, right? It's not under no circumstances are we supposed to judge others. We have to judge what we do. How do I do it? And this gives me some priority. So let's look at the next text and see what we get out of that. Okay. Let's go down. 3, coming back to the Torah now, Deuteronomy. And this is a section dealing with needy people among the Jewish people. Now we're going to get to this group. Who would like to read the English?
Read.
Thank
If
you.
there be among you a needy person, one of your kin, within any of your dwelling places in your land, which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your needy kin. You shall surely open your hand to them and lend them sufficient for their need. Beware lest there be a base thought in your heart saying, the 7th year, the year of remission, is at hand, and you be evil to your needy kin and give them nothing, that they cry to the Lord against you and guilt comes upon you. You shall surely give them, and you shall not be discontented in your giving to them, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all of your actions and all of your undertakings. For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall surely open your hand to your poor and needy kin in your land.
Okay, so now we're focusing again. This is, if you go back, this is about lending, right? Don't open your heart. And it says, you shall open your hand to them, verse 8, and lend them sufficient for their need. Again, if we remember the other verse, it's not about getting a payback. It's don't make them, in effect, beg. You see they have a need, lend them the money, lend them what they need. And this specific verse 9, you've all understood that there is this thing called a sabbatical year, right? So in the 7th year, all debts are erased. That's what happened. No matter who you loan money to, in the 7th year, your debts are erased. All of them are erased. No one owes you. So 7th year is coming up, and someone asks you for money at the end of the 6th year or in the 6th year. Don't harden your heart. Don't say, there's no way I'm going to get this back. If this is a poor person, you give them the money. And if you don't get it back, you don't get it back. And it's very clear if you look at verse 11, you shall surely open your hand. If you look at the way it's phrased, it says it double, patoach tiftach. It's a repetition of the verb to open. You have to open your hand. Don't close your hand. That's the image. Don't close your hand to the needy. Open it. Force your hand open. Okay. So how does this add anything to our discussion?
Well, I think to me, it first of all emphasizes our responsibility to the Jewish people broadly, starting with ourselves, our family, our local community. And it's really encouraging us to go the extra step. And it kind of made me think about just something I encountered related to a trip that Karen and I are going to go to Morocco. And I started looking at the Jewish people of Morocco and came across, these really compelling stories of our people living there. And then the role of the Joint Distribution Committee, and just thinking how, magnificent and powerful that is, that people are thinking about that. Obviously in the Shoah and the creation of the state of Israel, all how important that is. and your point too, where so many Jews don't give to Jewish causes. I mean, that's a fact. So it's building upon this theme, starting, to first take care of yourself and but really thinking about our broad commitment in all circumstances. So it's powerful to me. It feels good. I mean, I like, yeah.
Anyone else?
I think it's a very complicated situation. I mean, I got a guy who used to be employed by a wonderful friend of mine who was the general contractor on my place. And this guy was a worker for him. And he's an alcoholic, and he's without food and without resources and without anything. And I have a post office box. And I go to the post office daily. I walk there, it's good, healthy. This guy knows I go to the post office. And he's the guy who's there every day, in need. And he's not of my faith, he's not of my close family, he's just a guy that's there in need.
Right. So how do you deal with it?
Monday or Tuesday?
So Monday you give him $1 and Tuesday you don't?
I don't want to say that, Rabbi. I find it difficult to answer this question. I'm trying to enlighten you on the complexity of the issue, not solve it. I'm looking for you to solve it. What should I do?
Well, so first of all, do you see him as tzedakah or do you see him as a loan?
Tzedakah.
Well, okay, so now we're in a different category because according to our tradition, you're supposed to give a minimum of 10% and a maximum of 30%. That's kind of what our tradition came down at. Well, if you're still within your 10%, you haven't given the 10% and he needs a little money, you give it to him because he's asked. You don't care where it's going. Your job is not to judge. Your job is to deal with your tzedakah. On the other hand, you don't have to give him $10. You don't have to give him $100. You can give him $1. You can give him a sandwich if he's hungry. You can give him a drink of non-alcoholic if he needs a drink. You can take him pay for a meal.
I want to be the man with the plan. I want to sit down and say, okay, look.
Well, that's a different mitzvah. There's a different mitzvah.
I know.
And if you want to take on that obligation.
Well, it may be to somebody else. That's the problem,
Or you can refer him to a service.
Yes.
Right? Because there are services to help. He may not be willing, but you can fulfill your obligation by.
These are choices, and these choices are opportunities, and these choices and opportunities make this a complex area. I suggest to us all that one of the great things that we teach are, I think we have the responsibility of teaching our children is personal responsibility and self-reliance. And that is something different than charity and lending, but it's a core value. And, how do we do spend time teaching it. I don't know that there's guidance in that, that we should be teaching that in the Jewish tradition.
Well, I think Jews have done pretty well in teaching ethics to generally to our people. I mean, our people seem to be involved in every social justice movement that exists. You know,
Absolutely.
well, and so we must be doing something right. You know, this Amnesty International report that everyone is worked up about, Amnesty International was started by Jews. And many Jews are active in it. And it's the same impulse to want to make the world a better place. The fact that it may not say things that we love about our Jewish state doesn't mean that it's a terrible thing, that it's a terrible place. The impulse to do good doesn't mean I'm going to agree all the time with people who are doing mitzvot. They're trying to help a world that needs help. So let's look now at Vayikra. We're going to go to the Holiness Code. This is Kedoshim. We read it on Yom Kippur afternoon in our shul. We read it from the Holocaust scroll usually when we're actually there. And our confirmands bring it in to the sanctuary. And God willing, this year, we will be back in the sanctuary and they will carry it in and we'll see it. And we'll hear these words. So who would like to read these two verses from Leviticus?
I can read it.
Thank you, Rachel.
You shall not hate your fellow in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear or sin because of them. You shall not take vengeance, not bear any grudge against your fellow citizens. Rather, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord.
Okay, so here's two responsibilities. 17 says, don't hold back from telling your fellow Jew, that's how it's usually interpreted. These are interpreted to being the way we deal with each other as a people. Don't hold back your criticism of another. That doesn't mean you have to be mean. You know, you can criticize in a loving way. But don't, if you've seen something wrong, don't keep your mouth closed because then you're bearing the sin. You're sinning by not speaking up. But on the other hand, there's a positive thing you owe this other Jew. You need to love that neighbor as you love yourself. So you need to think about respecting and treating that person as you would want to be treated. That's the golden rule that we have as Jews. The way we phrase it is in the negative. This one is in the positive. And by the way, many people believe that that phrase comes from the New Testament. It is in the New Testament, but it comes from Leviticus. Remember, the Jews who wrote the New Testament were Jewish Christians, and they all knew about the Torah, and they had studied the Torah, and most of them had some kind of bar mitzvah, and quote it. Matthew quotes it over and over. John doesn't quote it because that's later. But if you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you get all kinds of the Jewish tradition flowing through there. And they have Jesus speaking those words because Jesus was Jewish. At least he was born of a Jewish mother. And that by definition made him a Jew. So what do you think about that?
I think it's highly aspirational and a beautiful aspiration, trying to think about it in the context of the moment in which we all live. I have a very, very hard time loving my neighbor, not literally, but figuratively, who is an anti-vaxxer and who is actively resisting any taking steps that would help that individual, would mean that that individual was doing what we talked about at the very beginning, taking responsibility for others and recognizing that we're all on the trampoline. So, you know, when you have that person actively rejecting that responsibility, actively rejecting the notion of the trampoline, it's really hard to love that person.
Right. So how are you thinking?
Like them.
How are you thinking about the word love in this case?
Could I say something?
Is that Monica? Oh, you're showing. Hi.
Well, you don't have to feel love. You just have to do love.
Right. So how are you
A
thinking?
smile.
How are you thinking of the
kindness.
word love?
Love is not a feeling, it's an action. Thank you.
Okay. So in this case, maybe the way you deal with the anti-vaxxer is you don't do him any harm. Right? You don't swear at him. You don't hurt him. You don't make him feel bad. You don't disrespect him. Because that's why the formula for the golden rule in Judaism is that which is loathsome to you, do not do to another. That which you hate, don't do to another. That's a Jewish definition of loving your neighbor as yourself. And by the way, that formulation, so the Christian formulation is do unto others as you would have others do unto you, right? Okay. So a Christian can say, if I were not Christian, I would want you to convert me and save me. Therefore, I'm going to save you, Jewish person, because that's what I would want. If I were an anti-vaxxer, or if I were a vaxxer, I would want you to, if I were an anti-vaxxer, I would want you to convert me to be a vaxxer. So you should be trying to convert me, or I should be trying to convert you. The Jewish formulation is don't do to others what you don't want done to you. So that definition of love is, in effect, respect the other person and don't try and make them into something that they don't want to be made into, because you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want them beating on you to become what they want you to become.
Rabbi, where is that cited, that and is that primacy to love thy neighbor as thyself? So go back to that statement that you made. So that came where in the
That's Mishnah and Talmud,
Mishnah and Talmud?
right? When they were interpreting it. So it's roughly at the same time that Christianity is evolving, right? It's the same period of time. It's what's called the intertestamental period. That was when rabbinic Judaism was being formulated. Christianity was beginning to form itself and eventually break away from Judaism. It was a period of a lot of religious fervor. Dead Sea Scrolls was before that, but those communities were all kind of formulating in that part of the world. Let's do one final one for most people, and for me, I have to say. And this kind of brings up what you just said about the anti-vaxxer. So let's look at, remember, this is in the context, in our tradition, this is interpreted as this enemy is a Jew. He's your enemy, but he's a Jew. It's not some foreign enemy, right? He's a part of our people, Amcha. Okay, who would like to read 4 and 5?
If you encounter your enemy's ox or donkey wandering, you shall surely bring it back to your enemy. If you see the donkey of the person who hates you lying under its burden, you shall not leave without helping them. You shall surely release it with them.
So here the obligation to your people is even the person who hates you, who is your sworn enemy, whatever that means, you've got to take his wandering donkey and bring it back to him wherever he is. And worse than that, if he's lying underneath the donkey or he's struggling with the donkey that's lying down under its burden, you cannot just go, hey, see, you deserve that. You got to stop and help that person and get them up, get the donkey up, get the person on the road, even if you hate him and he hates you. Now, that's pretty tough, don't you think?
Yes.
And that's in the Torah, right?
I think it's, I think we get into trouble because we exacerbate our separations. And I think that these precepts are looking for a way to stay in good harmony with each other, even if we disagree with each other. And I think it's a very important precept.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Dennis, and reflecting on our large Jewish tent and how fractured it is, and how powerful these words are. If we were all together hearing it, it would be powerful. It would be healing if we'd listen.
Hearing it meaning living it, right?
Yeah, and actually practicing it. When all of us, God willing, can go to Israel, there's the beautiful new Museum of the Diaspora, which is now called Anu, which means us. And it's really spectacular. And it tells the story of the Jewish people broadly. I mean, it is all of us. And I think it's going to have a big impact. I've heard Israelis saying, this is a description of all of us in ways that we haven't celebrated quite so much. So I'm with Dennis.
Where is that,
really
Mark?
powerful. It's in
Mark?
Tel Aviv, and I'm hoping we just saw a virtual of it last night through the American Zionist organizations, and it was really spectacular. I want to try to see if Mark Brannick can get it so we can see it. But the story is the Orthodox, Jews of Tunisia, gay and lesbian Jewish couples, everybody. I mean, it's the Jewish people, and it's a celebration of us as the Jewish people. And we need to do more of that, and we need to read this kind of text.
Right. It's on the University of Tel Aviv.
Yep.
It's on their campus. It's where it is the Diaspora Museum, but it's been redone. I think they spent $100 million on this redoing. But anyway, you're right. Remember again, I'm going to end with what we started with. We're looking at ethics from an aspirational notion, as Amy just said. These are aspirations. This is to motivate us to try and elevate the way we act. But as Dennis said, life is complicated. Nothing is just simple, and no set of precepts can give you exactly how to act when you're going to your mailbox and the same guy is there every day, and he's going to use whatever you give him to go get alcohol and feed his habit. That's being human. Being human is trying to figure it out. But there's a difference between taking ethics seriously, meaning really trying to figure it out, and just saying, the hell with it. I'll do what I want to do. I'm taking care of me, number one. I don't need to worry about anybody else. That is antithetical to Jewish tradition. So now our tradition starts with the big. Everyone is created in the image of God. But it also doesn't negate the small. We have a people and an obligation to our people. And within our people, we have obligations to all of them. And there are priorities. And one of those priorities is even to help those who hate us and we hate. It's hard, but if we take it seriously, life is complicated and hard, and it should be, because then it's more gratifying when we figure out and feel that we're doing something right, and not just because I want to do it, or I want to just do this because it makes me feel good. But I'm doing it because it's the right thing, even if I don't feel good. I don't think if I saw someone whose donkey was there, who hated me, and I had terrible relations and he had said terrible things about me, and I had said, I don't think I'd feel so good helping him. But I would struggle to do it because I know it's the right thing. And after it was done, I don't think I'd feel good. Well,
I think you would. I think you would.
I don't think I would. And the point is not to feel good. The point is to do what's right.
My project is to make Thanksgiving a better festival for our families. That's my project.
Okay, Alice.
I think that is proven in the hospitals in Israel. Look at all the Arabs that they take care of. These are
Yes.
people who say that, kill all the Jews, but our doctors take care of them.
Well, you're talking about like the Syrians who were brought in during the war, because Arab Israelis are Israelis, and the doctors are often Arab Israelis.
Yeah, no,
Talking
I'm
about
talking,
people
I'm
like the
talking
enemies.
about like if there's a war and we injure someone and they get taken to Hadassah Hospital and they're fixed. They're, taken
Right, they
care of.
are. In fact, the biggest case was the Syrians, because we didn't injure them. They were in the civil war going on in Syria. They were hurting each other, and they were coming to Israel to help them. And Israel took them to the hospital in the north, not Ziv, but a different one. Which one?
Yeah.
Right. And there were Arab Israeli doctors and Arab Israeli nurses, so they could speak Arabic with them and make them feel comfortable. And then they had to take them out, not over the border, because if they were seen coming over the Israeli border, they'd be killed by potentially their own people and their own families. So they took them to Greece, I believe, and then they brought them in from Greece into Syria. Thank God we have people among our people are doing pretty well with an ethical standpoint, but that's why we study this. And I have to say, if you listen to the prayers when you go to Beth Shalom and you look at the English of the prayers, that's all aspirational too. These are all messages that are saying to us, remember, it is hard, but this is what you should aspire to. That's why we keep saying it, because it isn't just kids, Dennis, that need to be reinforced, right? We need to be reinforced. All right, well, next week we'll look at some conflicts between the two ethics, but have a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Shabbat
Good night,
shalom.
everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
pleasure.